30 seconds. Press 9.
At the tone, please leave your first and last name, company, and phone number. If you have a difficult or unusual name, please spell it for proper.
*1. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the meeting over to Mr. Allard Butel, NASA's News and Multimedia Division Director. You may begin.
Thank you. Welcome to the fiscal year 2017 NASA Budget Proposal Media Teleconference. Joining us to provide an overview of the FY17 budget proposal and answer your questions is NASA Chief Financial Officer, David Radzanowski. Also joining us will be David Weaver, NASA Associate Administrator for the Office of Communications. As a reminder, all NASA budget material is available and posted at www.nasa.gov/budget. This includes the budget chart that we presented momentarily called the FY 2017 Budget Proposal Presentation. That's the document you need to follow along for this particular briefing. We'll now turn this over to Mr. Radzanowski, and then we'll take the questions. Sir?
Great. Thanks, Allard. And thanks, everyone, for joining us this afternoon to discuss NASA's 17 budget request. First of all, I do want to provide some broad, high-level context before I get into the details. First of all, NASA, we're operating very well in FY16. We do truly appreciate the congressional support that we've had in the past years, particularly as it's displayed in our FY16 appropriations. Our FY17 request builds upon that FY16 appropriations. The request, if enacted, would provide the continuity and the stability that we are looking for to continue to execute our overall plans across science, aeronautics, space technology, human spaceflight, and the NASA institutions. To provide some even higher level context first on the 17 budget, the overall President's request for FY17 adheres to the budget agreement for discretionary spending. However, doing so makes it difficult to appropriately fund national priorities across the board, including the priorities related to research and development and science investments. Therefore, the President's request does propose paid-for spending in the mandatory portion of the overall nation's budget for science, research, and development across multiple agencies. This mandatory funding in R&D is in the tune of about $4 billion across federal agencies, and they are paid for with offsets proposed in the overall budget. Within that context, NASA's FY17 request is $19.025 billion, of which $763 million is requested on the mandatory side of the budget. As a reminder, the overall budget is approximately $4 trillion request, of which more than 3/4 of the budget is on the mandatory side, with 1/4 of the budget on the discretionary side. For NASA's request, we do not distinguish between the discretionary and mandatory requests. As Dr. Holder noted in his earlier R&D budget press conference earlier today, it's all one request. It is all important to fund the research and development investments across the federal government. For NASA, the $19 billion request in 17 supports the plan we are on as funded in FY16. Now, the charts that you're using, I'm not going to go through every single chart. Either you have an opportunity to read those already or you will have forward. I do want to go through multiple items very quickly to allow time for you to answer questions. There will be a lag in the Ustreaming of it if you're watching on Ustream in terms of the page movements, but I'm going to continue to talk while those pages are moving forward. For those who are reading off the online version, I'll tell you what page you're on. So essentially, I am moving to page 9, which is the budget table on page 9. This table on page 9 breaks out the President's request for FY17 on our high level budget line items across science, aeronautics, space technology, exploration, space ops, education, safety, security, and mission services, construction, and environmental compliance and restoration. A couple things I'd like to point out in this chart. First of all, we do have a new budget line item called Space Transportation under Space Operations. This new line item includes funding for commercial crew development and demonstrations, as well as space station crew and cargo services. And I'll talk more about those areas later on. In addition, the out years, as they have been in previous requests for NASA, are notional. Some areas are more notional than others, and some do reflect policy decisions. In general, the out years are assuming a 2% per year annual increase on the discretionary base, except for aeronautics. Aeronautics, is, as I will talk about later, is part of a 10-year budget plan. So the out-year numbers for aeronautics reflect what is considered a policy decision, and you see those growing significantly in the out years. In addition, if you look at under exploration, the exploration research and development line, you notice that this grows significantly in the out years, particularly starting at FY19, and that is a reflection of assumed funding that will be necessary to, one, both support the asteroid robotic redirect mission, as well as support funding for prototyping and ultimate habitat system in cislunar environment. So those are two areas in the out years, aeronautics and exploration research and development, that have increased emphasis in the out years. Now what I'm going to do now is go through each of these budget line items and provide a highlight or two of each of the request level here. Moving on to the next page, page 11, which is Earth Science. The Earth Science request is $2.032 billion. This is a $111 million request above 2016 enacted. A couple items I would like to note within Earth Science, and it's what's laid out on page 11. First of all, our request assumes $130.8 million in 17 to support Landsat 9, which will allow a launch as early as 2021 for Landsat 9. In addition, within the sustained land imaging program, there are additional investments for new technologies and miniaturization related to land imaging that the intent is to reduce the size and the cost of future Landsat missions. The out-year assumptions, again, are notional here. However, based on the thinking right now, is funding in the out years would support a Landsat 10 in approximately the end of the 2020s. Finally, I would just note for Earth Science, there is funding for STEM education activities within the Earth Science budget. There is an activity known as GLOBE Education Activities. It's funded at $6 million in FY17, and this has been funded for the past few years at about $6 million a year. Moving on to page 12, planetary science. The request for planetary science is $1.519 billion. This is a $112 million reduction compared to FY16. A couple items to note for planetary science. First of all, we continue development supporting a Mars 2020 lander mission for Mars 2020. Also in this request, for the first time in the 16 request, there was no funding for any planning of activities, robotic activities beyond Mars 2020. In FY17, we are requesting $10 million for the next step planning for the robotic mission that would come beyond Mars 2020. There is no notion of whether this would be a lander or an orbiter. It's just to initiate planning in 2017 for opportunities beyond 2020. Our request for Europa continues to support formulation of the Europa mission. The overall request for Europa in 2017 is $49.6 million. This is a reduction from the $175 million provided in FY16. Based on this funding request level and the notional out years, the President's budget request supports a Europa mission launch in the late 2020s. I will note, this is online, if you look at our congressional justifications, Congress did request as part of FY16 that when we submit our FY17 budget, that we provide a funding stream that would support launching Europa in 2022. That also included a lander and also includes launch with the Space Launch System. We have provided an estimate within the congressional justification that would support a Europa mission in 2022. Again, we aren't requesting at that level, but we are providing that information to Congress. A couple things I will note on that dollars numbers that's in the congressional justification. One, we are still in formulation, so those numbers are subject to change as we refine the mission. Two, it at this point in time does not include any estimate for our lander. We are still assessing what the cost would be to support a lander as part of an orbiter mission in 2022. And the third item I would note is in that estimate, we only assume funding for pricing for an evolved expendable launch vehicle. We do not have a pricing estimate yet at this point in time for SLS. However, I will note we are in formulation for Europa. We have not precluded use of an SLS for launch. At this point in time, we have not made a decision as to what launch vehicle would support the Europa mission. And then finally, I would note under planetary science that we are still assessing InSight. As you're all aware, we decided based on issues with instruments on the spacecraft to forego launching InSight in the 2016 launch window. We are making a decision in the March timeframe as to whether we will continue support to InSight for the next launch opportunity in 2018 or go some other route. The budget request at this point in time assumes that InSight has launched and has sustaining operations for launch. So we may have to revise our budget request within this total allocation based on the decision in March. But right now, no decision has been made. Moving on to page 13, astrophysics. The request for astrophysics is $782 million. This is a $51 million increase above 2016. A couple items to note. SOFIA is fully funded at, I believe, slightly above $80 million. So its operations, continued operations supported in 2017. And as several missions in extended ops and astrophysics are going through a senior review in 2018, SOFIA will be part of that 2018 senior review. The next decadal mission after Webb, which is known as WFIRST or AFTA, our request in FY17 for this activity, which is in formulation, is $90 million. This is the same as we are enacted in FY16. And at that request level of $90 million with notional out years, the assumption of this program that's currently in formulation would be a mid-2020s launch for the follow-on to Webb. Also within astrophysics, it includes funding for Science Mission Directorate STEM activities, education activities that provide opportunities across the Science Mission Directorate. We just bookkeep them in astrophysics. The request for SMD STEM activities is $25 million, and this is a reduction from the $37 million provided in FY16. So within the broader science portfolio, the request is $31 million for education activities, $25 million within astrophysics, and $6 million within earth science for GLOBE. Moving on to page 14, the James Webb Space Telescope. The request for James Webb is $569 million. This is a $51 million reduction. This reduction is as planned for that program. We are past the peak of the development curve for Webb as we're approaching its launch in 2018. So this funding stream profile laid out here is as agreed since we rebaselined Webb a few years ago. We are currently on schedule, both from a cost and a schedule standpoint, for supporting an October 2018 launch for Webb. Again, if you have an opportunity before it goes in integration and testing, folks should get out to Goddard to take a look at all the mirrors that are integrated on the backplane right now before we go in integration and testing. Next page, page 15, heliophysics. The request for heliophysics is $699 million. This is a $49 million increase above 2016. And the FY17 request for heliophysics is important as there are multiple spacecraft that are intended for launch in 2018. Highlighting a couple of those, the Solar Orbiter Collaboration, which is a partnership with the European Space Agency. Our request for that activity is, the NASA portion of that activity is $80.7 million. It's close to a $30 million increase above FY16, and that funding is necessary to support the launch in 2018. Our request for Solar Probe Plus is $232.5 million. Again, that also supports the launch of Solar Probe Plus in 2018. And we have an additional couple other of activities in heliophysics, both ICON and GOLD, which are also to be launched in 2018. Also, we do in this request have increased emphasis on CubeSat activities within heliophysics, tripling the funding to a request of $15 million in FY17, which was at $5 million in FY16. Moving on to page 16, aeronautics. The aeronautics request is an area of emphasis as part of the President's FY17 request. As many folks have been following aeronautics, the program has put forth 6 strategic thrusts that have, I would say, received very broad support across industry, across the administration, across Congress, of areas that we need to focus on in aeronautics to support our future aeronautics, both control systems, autonomous systems, as well as cleaner and more efficient aircraft down the road. In the past couple of years, we have seen congressional enhancements above administration's requests in an aeronautics arena. For FY17, the administration is requesting $790 million for aeronautics. This is a $150 million increase above 2016. This is a 23% proposed increase. Essentially, the FY17 request would accelerate investments in our overall aeronautics strategy. It assumes a 10-year commitment of $10.6 billion, and a portion of that $10.6 billion is part of the President's 21st Century Clean Transportation Plan, which is focused on reducing consumption and emissions. And NASA is a small player in that overall presidential initiative. However, that additional investment in that area will allow us to accelerate investments in experimental X-planes. These experimental X-planes will help us demonstrate the technologies we've been developing as part of our research program and bring them to a integrated system test to bring them to a level that then industry could be able to incorporate into their future aircraft. I will note, as part of the 17 request level, it does support the initiation of 2 X-planes. The first would be the low boom flight demonstrator, which would reduce cost, emissions, noise for a supersonic aircraft. And the request for low boom flight demonstrator is $61 million. In addition, we would initiate the ultra-efficient aircraft, X-aircraft, such as a hybrid ring body concept. We would initiate that in FY16 at $16.9 million request. And finally, one of the other aircraft that we would look at but would be supported in the out years as part of the 10-year plan is an X-plane that would demonstrate a hybrid electric aircraft. Finally, one item to note in aeronautics is that our request for hypersonics is an increase to $25 million. Moving on to page 17, space technology. The request for space technology is $140 million. The request for space technology is $827 million, which is an increase of $140 million above 2016 enacted. Within this request level, $130 million is requested for Restore-L as a technology demonstration for in-space robotic servicing. We were in the pre-formulation stage of Restore-L. We will move to formulation in 2017 with a notional launch date in fiscal year 2020. As a reminder, this previously had in-space robotic servicing had been funded within space operations within the space station program under space station research. In 2016, Congress had appropriated this activity in space technology, and we are continuing as part of the 17 request to assume this within the space technology portfolio. The overall space technology request does continue support for a solar electric propulsion demonstration. This is capability we need for ongoing future exploration missions beyond low Earth orbit and onto Mars. Our request for solar electric propulsion in 17 is $66.6 million. And this activity would ultimately be demonstrated as part of the asteroid robotic redirect mission that I will talk more about later. Finally, note of an item in space technology is the request does support continued activities for space-to-ground laser communications demonstration. The LaserComm relay demonstration, LCRD, is scheduled for its key decision point in 2016. This is the time where we make a commitment both to the overall cost of the activity as well as its launch date. The request for lunar communications relay demonstration is $25.7 million in FY17. Moving on to exploration systems development. This line supports our activities for SLS, Orion, and exploration ground systems. The request is $2.860 billion. This is an $820 million reduction from the FY16 enacted level. Our request supports the agency external commitment that we made to the nation, both to the administration and Congress and the taxpayer, of having SLS and exploration ground systems ready for an EM-1 launch in 2018. And the request supports a full-up Orion with full capability ready for the EM2 launch in 2023. I will note, however, that due to appropriations received up through 2016 and ongoing positive execution, both by NASA civil servants and our prime contractors, we are on track to support an EM1 launch in 2018. And based on the appropriations received to date and continued positive execution, we are on track for an EM2 launch in 2021. The request, however, as I noted, supports our commitments for EM1 in 2018 and an EM2 launch in 2023. Breaking out, I know this is an area that has some interest in terms of the funding levels. The request for SLS is $1.310 billion. The request for Orion is $1.119.8 billion, and the request for Exploration Ground Systems is $429.4 million. One item I would also like to recognize within Exploration Systems development is in the FY16 appropriations, we were provided funding to initiate work on the upper stage known as the Exploration Upper Stage, EUS. Our FY17 request protects the launch date for EM2. To protect that launch date at our request level, we are assuming an ICPS upper stage for EM2 to maintain the schedule at this funding level. We are continuing, however, to execute per congressional direction in 16 to move forward on Exploration Upper Stage. We will bring it to preliminary design review by the end of 2016. We do, as an agency, want to execute Exploration Upper Stage. We need it for future Mars missions down the road. However, at our funding request level and to maintain the EM2 launch schedule as proposed in our request, we are assuming an ICPS for EM2. And EUS would then be go forward for future exploration missions at a later time. Moving on to page 19, Exploration, Research, and Development. The request for Exploration, Research, and Development is $477 million. This is a $127 million increase above FY16 enacted. There are two activities within this line item I would like to highlight. First is the asteroid robotic redirect mission. The request for that activity is $66.7 million. As I noted, that is in formulation. And that, based on the formulation and the notional out-year dollars, we're looking at a target date in the early to mid-2020s, roughly 2023, but that is just a notional date at this point in time. In addition, within Exploration, Research, and Development, the other key area we'd like to highlight is funding to support development of habitation systems that would lead ultimately to a habitat that we could use in the cislunar environment. Our request for habitation systems within this activity is $90 million in FY17. We were provided $55 million as part of the FY16 appropriations. So we are requesting a significant increase for habitation systems in FY17. And as I noted on the broader budget chart, if you look in the out years for Exploration, Research, and Development, you see a significant bump up beginning in 19 and continuing on through 2020 and 2021. This increase reflects both support for going forward with the asteroid robotic redirect mission, as well as funding for habitat system development ultimately leading to development of a habitat in the cislunar environment. Moving on to page 20, space transportation. As I noted, this is a new budget line item as part of the 17 request. It includes funding for commercial crew development demonstration and space station crew and cargo program. The request for commercial crew development demonstration is $1.184 billion. This request level supports 2 uncrewed demonstration missions by our partners, SpaceX and Boeing, in FY17, 1 crewed demonstration in FY17, and 1 crewed demonstration in FY18, although that would take place in calendar year 2017 based on the current milestones being met by both SpaceX and Boeing. Therefore, this request supports both development and demonstration of crew services space station by the end of calendar year 2017. And at this point, our partners continue to execute on their milestones as laid out. This is the request level that would be necessary to continue to support if they execute on their milestones. The space transportation line also supports space station crew and cargo services. The request for space station crew and cargo services is $1.5728 billion. This line item supports funding both for CRS-1 and CRS-2 contracts. It supports funding for the Soyuz seats that we've purchased, and it would also support crew services from domestic providers beginning in fiscal year FY18. Moving on to page 21, International Space Station. The request for International Space Station is $1.431 billion. Again, this number looks lower than in prior years because Space Station crew and cargo services is now funded in a different line item. Essentially, this overall request only supports space station operations and maintenance and space station research. This overall request laid out here in the out years supports space station operations through at least 2024. Moving on to the next page, space and flight support. This is page 22. The request for space and flight support is $887 million. This supports multiple activities within space operations to include space communications, which is at the request level of $612.4 million, human spaceflight operations and support, which is at $128.3 million, the launch services program, which is at $87.2 million, rocket propulsion testing, which is at $47.6 million, and finally, 21st Century Launch Complex, which request is at $12 million. The 21st Century Launch Complex was a multi-year investment in our spaceports, both support government as well as private sector activities, primarily at Kennedy and at Wallops. Our $12 million request in FY17 is the last year of this activity. Page 23, education. The request for education is $100 million. This is a $15 million reduction compared to the $115 million in FY16. Within the education portfolio, the request in 17 is $24 million for space grant, $9 million for EPSCoR, $30 million for minority activities, VREP, and $37.1 million for STEM education and accountability projects. With this overall request for the agency comes to $131 million for STEM activities. As I noted, there is $25 million within SMD astrophysics for STEM education activities, an additional $6 million for GLOBE within Earth Science. Final page, next page, page 24, is Safety, Security, and Mission Services, as well as Construction and Environmental Compliance and Remediation. These two activities support the underpinnings, the institution, agency management and operations. It supports the operations of our centers and our major components and facilities to ensure that we have the capabilities to implement all the activities that we've talked about earlier. It also provides funding for the majority of our workforce. A couple items I would note within this request is that we have consolidated our agency IT services under the CIO within Agency Management and Operations. This request for Agency Information Technology Services is $244 million. In addition, the overall request under construction assumes construction of the Ames Biosciences Lab at $40 million. This we requested in a previous budget and was not funded by Congress, and we are proposing it again as part of the FY17 request. Finally, the overall budget does assume a reduction in overall workforce that would be achieved through attrition. The 17 request assumes an FTE civil servant reduction of 66 FTE across all our centers, headquarters, as well as the NASA Shared Services Center down at Stennis Space Center. With that, I'm sorry I went that through quickly, but I did want to leave time for any questions that you've had on any of these materials that we just went through, as well as any other of the budget materials that we've posted on nasa.gov. Thank you very much.
As you just said, we'll take questions now. We have a lot of reporters on the line, so to get to as many people as possible, we ask them to start off with just one question. If we have time, we'll go back around. Now the operator will explain how to ask a question and then call on the first reporter.
At this time, if you would like to ask a question, please press star one. Please unmute your phone or record your first and last name clearly when prompted. To withdraw your question, you may press star two. Once again, at this time, if you would like to ask a question, please press star one.
Seth Borenstein with the Associated Press. Your line's open.
Yes, thank you. Let's go right back to exploration. The overall budget is a 17% reduction from FY16. It's the lowest level since 2008. So can you explain what's not in there, what's been cut, why is it so low, what are the impacts of this rather large cut? Thank you.
So a couple things, Seth, in terms, as I noted, that this request does support our agency commitments that we've laid out in prior year budgets, both for EM1 in 2018 and EM2 in 2023. This request is consistent with the requests we've had in the prior years to support those external commitments. So that is consistent with the request. If you look at the 16 request, we had an estimate for FY17, and this is what we're requesting. Overall, I would essentially say we continue to work towards a launch of EM1 because of appropriations received for a 2021 launch date for EM2 and 2018 for EM1. To address, sort of your broader question, that we have within the budget constraints that we are operating and our overall $19 billion request, this provides a balanced portfolio across all our activities, both aeronautics, science, the institution, education, and exploration. It will continue all the activities that were laid out in our 16 appropriations. I understand that it's not necessarily at the profile in some areas that Congress asked, but this is the administration proposal as to how to provide a balanced NASA budget, both for exploration and across other areas. So what is short, as I mentioned, is 16. We are moving forward on exploration upper stage, but this as an example. But in 17, we will at some point be doing exploration upper stage, but we can't support it for EM2 at this budget request level. Does that help you, Seth?
Okay, Keith Cowing with NASA Watch.
Hey, Dave, I have a simple math question for you. On your education page, one with the smiling kid with the astronaut autograph while the budget's being cut, you talk about a decrease from 16 to 17 to 100 million. It doesn't really ramp up again in your notional numbers. Yet you just said that there's other money elsewhere. Can you give me a single number for FY17 that describes the total amount of education that is being funded at NASA? And if you can't, can you tell me why you can't tell me that?
Yes, it is $131 million, the request. That includes the $100 million under the education budget line. It includes $25 million within the astrophysics budget line for SMD STEM activities, and it includes $6 million within Earth Science for GLOBE activities.
And this makes
so that total is $131 million.
And there's no reference to education and public outreach anywhere else in the agency, which is substantial?
This is the activities that we have for STEM activities. Now, there are outreach activities that are done at the centers and within communications and other areas.
How much does NASA
that we do not include that in our STEM education.
Can you tell me how much NASA spends on education and public outreach in this budget?
I do not have that number for you right now.
Okay, we're going to go to Ken Kramer with Universe Today.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. The question is, I'd like to go back to SLS and Orion. You were talking about having a balanced program here at NASA, but when I look at these numbers, most of the programs are getting a small increase or a small decrease, but SLS and Orion is getting a 25% decrease. So I don't understand how that is balanced, and I really don't understand how the program can move forward without this significant delay. Thanks.
As I noted earlier, the request that we have for exploration systems development supports EM1 launch in 2018 and an EM2 commitment in 2023. So this is the commitment we had made previously a couple of years ago to the administration and Congress of what our request levels support. Now, we have received additional appropriations above those request levels that allow us to more confidently support that 2018 launch date for EM1. And because of those appropriations and execution, we are on schedule planning for a 2021 launch date for EM2.
But why was this cut so much compared to the other portions of NASA? That's what I don't understand. Thanks.
Hey, Dave, it's Weaver. And Ken, I'd love to speak to your question. So I think Dave already answered it one way, so let's try that again. This budget supports the agency's commitment to EM1 launching in 2018. That's not, so there's no slip. That's what we have committed to doing, and it supports the agency's baseline commitment to EM2 in 2023. Number one. Number two, obviously, it takes more than just a rocket and a capsule to get to Mars. You have to look at the total NASA budget. You have to look at the work that's being done in SMD with the precursor missions that we have, the robotic precursor missions that we have. You have to look at the space tech budget. You have to look at the HEO portfolio beyond SLS and Orion to get a sense of that full picture of what we believe we need in order to advance the journey to Mars to that next level into cislunar space. You heard us talk about the $90 million that that we have in the budget for habitation systems in the cislunar space area. You heard Dave talk about the asteroid redirect mission and the progress we're making on that. So we're balancing a lot of different things in the exploration portfolio beyond a couple of line items that seem to get a disproportionate amount of attention. And again, I'd just say that if you look at the 8-year record of this administration's commitment to exploration, $68 billion of investment into exploration over the last 8 years. And finally, just as Dave pointed out, the reality is that with the funding levels that Congress has been providing, we feel confident that we can accelerate that EM2 launch date to 2021. So we feel like we're making advancements on the exploration front while investing in lots of other important areas as well.
Okay, next we'll go to Jeff Faust with Space News.
Yeah, I was wondering if you can give an estimate of the total value of the FY17 budget proposal for the asteroid redirect mission, not just the ARRM activities, but the other activities that have been traditionally included. And if you're talking about doing ARM, launching a robotic mission in 2023 or thereabouts, what does that mean for when you would actually do the crewed mission to the recovered boulder? Thanks.
So let me see if I can. I got my deputy Andrew Hunt here looking at the numbers, but we have about $50 million within SMD for asteroid detection. As I noted, we have $66.7 million in space technologies for solar electric propulsion activities. We have activities that are supported within our space technology and HEO that support in-space robotic servicing that can be used for a robotic mission, that can be applicable for robotic mission. That's about $32 million. I did mention that solar electric propulsion, $67 million. And again, within human exploration operations earlier, specifically to the robotic redirect mission, it is $67.7 million requested. So I actually haven't totaled all those up, but there is actually $1 million in space technology for citizen science activities that's supported by the Office of Chief Technologist. So if you add all those up, Andrew's doing the calculation for me. 217. Again, but specifically for formulation for the asteroid robotic redirect mission, that is the $67.8 million. That's specifically on that mission. All those other activities, SCP, robotic servicing capabilities to asteroid detection, are activities that we are going to do regardless going forward and are needed. In terms of the crewed mission, we're still on line to support getting humans to an asteroid as proposed by the president by 2025.
Next up is Eric Berger with Ars Technica.
Hi, thank you, David and David. I'd just like to follow up Jeff's question. Sort of walk me through kind of how you got delayed from the notional 2020 to 2023 for ARRM, and how do you get asteroids or humans to an asteroid by 2025 if you're not launching to get out to the asteroid until 2023?
Well, a couple of things. Again, this is notional. We're looking at targets. 2023 is a strong number. It could be earlier than that based on what we get in the out years. So don't get fixated that there's a delay on ARM at this point in time. The 17 request supports a robotic mission in the early 2020s. Secondly, in terms of crew, if you remember, we are bringing a asteroid component back to cislunar space so that crew could get to it by 2025. Cislunar space is, we don't have a long trajectory time for crew to get to. It's essentially getting to the asteroid and bringing it back to cislunar space within that time period.
Okay, Marcia Smith with Space Policy Online.
Thank you very much. I'm still trying to get my head around whether it's important or not that you have these two different budget figures, the discretionary and the mandatory, and how they relate to each other. So not to beat a dead horse, but could you just explain one more time what you mean by mandatory spending, which sounds like it's required as opposed to being optional? And is it important to the administration or to Congress that you have these two different amounts or colors of money?
So I think how you described it, first of all, is colors of money. The overall federal budget is comprised of mandatory and discretionary. So for purposes of our talking about this, discretionary is that goes through the appropriations process every year and is provided funding through an Appropriations Act. Mandatory funding generally goes through an authorization process or a reconciliation process and is outside the appropriations process. So that's essentially how we're delineating between those two.
So the appropriate, excuse me, but let me see.
Go through the appropriations process.
So the appropriations committees will be dealing with the $18.3 billion, and how will you get the other $700 million?
Congress has the ability to address the $19 billion request through either appropriations or through authorization activities, reconciliation. And we will work with Congress, both the appropriators and the authorizers, to implement our $19 billion overall request to meet the priorities laid out by both the President and Congress.
Okay, Mike Wall with...
Karen, before we move on, just Weaver, I want to address Marcia's question. It's a great question. Just want to, just what Dave said, this is not a foreign concept to Congress. There are other agencies' budgets. There are other appropriations bills. There are other bills that other agencies that have mandatory dollars that fund their program. It's new for us, but it's not a foreign concept to Congress. And we're hopeful and optimistic that Congress will go along with this proposal because what it'll mean is more certainty in our funding in certain portions of our budget moving forward. This should be seen for people who advocate more constancy of purpose in NASA funding, who want to have greater certainty in our funding levels over long periods of time because we work on such long horizons. This is a proposal everybody should get behind. There should be bipartisan support for this approach to providing stability in funding for us.
All right, thank you, Mr. Weaver. Mike Wall, Space.com, you're up.
Okay, thanks, guys. I guess a quick question about the whole, like the Europa mission. And you're talking in this budget about being ready for a late 2020 launch. And I'd like to go into just a bit more detail about that Congress mandated that you guys should be ready to go by 2022. And like you mentioned that you provided estimates for how much money it would take to get ready for 2022. I mean, how much would it take, and what's the disparity? Could you just go into a little more detail about that?
So, as I noted earlier, we did provide an estimate in congressional justification to support 2022. That funding profile assumes only an orbiter. We're still working on an estimate of what a lander would be. In addition, it assumes funding pricing for an evolved expendable launch vehicle. Congress had asked for a pricing essentially for an SLS, and we are working on assessing what that would be, but we don't have that available as part of the 17 request. So to give me an example of this, our request in 17 is $49.6 million. The rough estimate profile we had to support 2022 would be $194 million. And again, we do caution within our $19 billion request, to find an additional $150 million, whether within the science portfolio or abroad, we felt would upset the balance within our overall agency portfolio. So we do not think it's prudent to support a 2022 launch at the funding level requested. The out years then are also provided in there. So that gives you an idea of the difference it would take in 17.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Lauren Brush with The Verge.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I would like some more details about these cislunar habitats. Specifically, how does that change what NASA originally planned for cislunar space? What's the timeline going to look like? I mean, what are these private partnerships, public and private partnerships going to look like? Any more detail there would be really appreciated.
So a couple things. We do have some partnerships already with providers through our what is known as our next BAAs. This is essentially funding that supports activities related to systems that we would need in the habitat that aren't necessarily for an actual habitat. The 17 request would support additional activities through that next BAA activity. It would also support activities we have going on within our advanced exploration system related to ecosystems that we would need in the habitat. In addition, it would also support overall potential design on prototypes for habitat systems. And this gets us along the path so that in the out years in FY18 and beyond, we would start supporting prototyping for an actual habitat system that potentially could be used in the cislunar environment. The idea of the partnerships also allows private industry to promote additional activities that they may then use for potential low Earth orbit activities. Other activities they support would be like docking hatches. We'd support life support, radiation sensors, spacecraft fire safety, and then module development, prototyping. So those are the type of areas that would be supported with our $90 million request.
Okay, we have just a couple minutes left, and we have one reporter who has to go for a follow-up. So we'll go to Seth Bornstein with the AP, and then call it a teleconference. Seth?
Yes, thank you. I guess I felt like you didn't answer, David, my question, which is what did you specifically cut in the $600 million in exploration budget from 16 to 17? Are you basically saying? You're saying we could still do everything, then are you saying that last year you could do it with $600 million more and now you're doing it with $600 million less? It sounds like you might have been running things wrong last year, or this year, I guess, which you prefer. What specifically is not in the budget or cut in the exploration budget from 16 to 17? Where does the how would you account for that $600-some million? Or $800 million, depends on which one you want to use. And if you can run through the SLS and Orion numbers again, please. But preferably the first one, just what's been cut specifically.
As I mentioned, the one area that we do not assume exploration upper stage in FY17 requests. The other areas are risk reduction activities that support future missions. In addition, in terms of schedule margin and flexibility, and we will have to get additional information for you as to what specifically was cut, but I've identified more of those. The additional funding that we have been receiving is allowing us with higher confidence to meet earlier scheduled dates than the commitments that we've laid out. In addition, the additional money is allowing us to do risk reduction activities. We are trying to develop a long multi-decade activity that supports capability for future Mars missions. What happens when there are, at our funding level, is we become more focused on EM1 and 2 and not providing a capability, a broad capability across these activities for future missions.
Okay, that is all the time we have for the last question. As a reminder, all our budget material is posted on www.nasa.gov/budget. And reporters, please stay on the line for replay details from the operator. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, and this does conclude our